Good morning, everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here, everybody both in person and live streaming on the internet, and welcome you to our Q'd In event today. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing to you our presenter today, Chris Dellen. Chris is the president of CPI. I've worked with Chris for many, many years. He holds his MBA and has extensive experience in sales and marketing, strategic planning, even technology and automation, really kind of the whole breadth of this topic. And I think he's put together a very compelling presentation for you guys today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Corey. Well, thank you to everybody for coming out here today. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you get some value from this topic. And I like to set good expectations, okay? So I just want you to know who you are dealing with today. I'm a competitive guy, and my daughter and I have some serious races down our driveway. And I think that plays a lot into the topic today because we're all trying to drive revenue for our businesses. And I hope you get some value from this today. It's a topic I'm extremely passionate about. Before I dive into it, if you haven't worked closely with CPI in the past, I work with over 120,000 businesses. And just some of the companies that we've had the pleasure to partner with over the years. I'm very proud of the work we've been able to do. So why is this topic relevant? I think probably to everybody in the room it's a little bit different, but a key thing that's very, very impactful to me is starting with the forecast that goes beyond 30 days. And why 30 days? Revenue's the top line. Everything comes out of that. If you can't predict it, you can't predict what needs to be underneath that. If you can't predict what is underneath that, then you have a very scary business. And you know, a lot of organizations really struggle getting beyond 30 days and understanding what the revenue should be. And I think it's a topic that we need to start paying more attention to. The second reason I think this topic is really applicable is in most organizations, your sales team, especially salespeople that are really knocking it out of the park, are probably your highest paid resources in your organization. And according to some research, they spend 10.8 hours a week selling. I'm just going to let that sink in for just 1 second. So your highest paid resource is actually doing what they do best, 22% of the time. And so there's a lot of opportunity to improve that, and my friend Jed Clampett saw this statistic, and he's struggling with it as well. The third thing that I think this is really impactful is, and this is very near and dear to my heart because we're in the technology space, but I think you can extrapolate this data across a lot of different industries. So if you look at technology sales between 1964 and 2010, if you had $100 in revenue, you'd spend 22 of those dollars on sales and marketing. And now remember, this statistic I want to share with you here, this is in the technology space, so it may be a little bit different for your business, but I think it's going up across all industries. And so any guesses here for the live audience of what that is from 2010 to 2018? Anybody have any ideas? Just shout them out. 35? 35? All right. 37 was close. But you think about this, you know, whether you're a sales professional, a sales leader, or the CEO of your business, that's a huge, huge jump. I can't even state it enough. It blows my mind. You think about this. If your net profit is below 10%, you've just lost money. If your business is a historical business, that's huge. It's mind-shifting to me. And I think those three reasons, if you kind of couple those together, forecasting revenue beyond 30 days is not an easy thing to do. As a matter of fact, one of the bucket list items my wife and I did a number of years ago was an Ironman 70.3. We trained for that sucker for like a year and a half, so we didn't die out there. And when we did that, we got to the day, we did the race, and it was an awesome experience. It was a lot of hard work, but that doesn't even come close to comparing with the hard work it takes to compare and predict revenue beyond 30 days in my experience with businesses. And so I've got Whether they're secrets or not, you can decide. But I have seven recommendations for you today that I hope you walk away with that are impactful to your business. And the first one is come to terms with where your business is today. And I have a model that I'm going to talk to you about in a second. Okay? The second, if you haven't organized your sales process, you need to do it today. And I'll talk a lot more deeper on that topic. Tracking your sales activities. I don't know how deep you go into tracking those today, but there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. Recommendations on just some things that you should be looking from a sales and measuring from a sales perspective. I'm going to get into that and how do you benchmark yourself. And then, you know, with all of this stuff that we're talking about kind of comes an extra added dose of accountability. And we're going to talk about handling that with your sales team. And then there's a lot of room when you organize a process to automate and then improve that over time. And so you gotta continue moving the needle, especially with that going from the cost of revenue generation going from 22% to 37% or whatever it is in your business. It's a mountain we all have to climb, and it's better to face it before that happens than after that happens. So let's talk about where you're at. And now, I'm not sure how deep all of you go into the sales processes. If you don't understand what I'm talking about here in a second, you will by the time the presentation's over, okay? So if I lose you here for a minute, stick with me, we'll cover it. So this is a way to map a sales organization's journey. How do you get, you know, for lack of a better term, good to great in how you sell, okay? The first one is, do you have a standardized sales structure? A lot of organizations don't. A lot of them do. But that's kind of the first piece of the puzzle, is actually putting a standardized sales process in place. The second, once you do, and this is where we're going to start getting into, you know, some of the stuff we're going to cover here in a lot deeper detail in a couple of minutes, is what is your understanding of your universe of opportunities? How deep can you go? If you don't have a sales structure, you really can't get to that level of depth because it's more kind of gut feeling, not that that's always wrong, but it can lead to some challenging decisions. And then actually refining where you're at by stage so you can understand where are you losing your opportunities, where can you plug the gaps of where you're dropping off. So in the sales process, can you refine down to see what it is? So if your organization has to do a demo or a presentation and your win rate after that just goes off a cliff, do you know that? Can you adjust? And the last is actually getting down to the activity level. And you may say, well, we do activity level optimization today. We look at our email open rates, we look at our email click-through rates, but do you understand that in terms of your entire sales process? It's a lot more complicated. And so let's dig into some of these topics here, but the first step is really kind of coming to terms with where you're at in your journey of improving how you sell your business. So let's talk about getting your sales process organized. And this, our owner gave me this picture probably 10 years ago, and I have it pinned up on my chalkboard, and this is what a lot of sales processes look like. You start in with a lot of prospects, and then you get really lucky with one or two, and you don't know what happened in the middle. And why should you be thinking about actually standardizing it? So let's not even talk about, you know, the actual sales process. Why should you spend the energy? A lot of times salespeople are very resistant to actually putting structure around the sales process. Why should you go through that pain? Harvard Business Review says did a study on organizations who had a formal process and organizations who didn't. Organizations who do have an 18% increase in sales. So to me, that's enough of a motivator to start thinking about that really quick. We talked about this in the graphic a second ago, but you know, the problem is most sales processes are not repeatable because you don't know what happened. I can't even, we sell very complex solutions, okay? We may have 1,000 customer interactions on some of our larger sales. How do you map that out? How do you understand? How do you package that up and repeat it? It's not predictable, so you can't, that whole problem of predicting revenue out 30 days, that's hard to do. It can't be improved because you don't know what happened to get you there in the first place, and that leaves you kind of stuck. And so where do you start? How do you start focusing on this? You start shrinking the box. You start breaking the sales process up into chunks, okay? And I'm going to talk about two specific things that you have to do to really impact this. And the first is actually creating a pipeline, a sales pipeline that mirrors your sales process. All right, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Next thing you need to do is actually create a revenue factor to start predicting. You know, at the early stages, your chances of winning that deal are low. At the end, they're high. And you start creating a revenue factor. And then the third thing is tracking 6 key pieces of information for every deal. To me, there's 6 non-negotiable things, and you can add more to that depending on what your sales process is. So let's talk. I've created a very generic process, and so I want you to keep 2 things separate. You have the process, and you have the deal. So a lot of people today track deals in a spreadsheet, or deals in a CRM, or deals in 100 different, maybe your email inbox in the worst case scenario. It happens, believe me. So I've got a very generic one that I'm just going to use for illustrative purposes today. It's simple. So you think all sales has to start with some sort of conversation, right? You can't really understand if there's a problem that you can solve if you don't have a conversation. That's an easy, simple entry point. Moving along after that conversation, if you've identified a need, that's kind of the second high-level thing. Do they have a problem that you have a solution for? Okay? If you do, have you provided them some sort of quote or some purchase vehicle? Remember, this is very simple. This is very generic. Are you negotiating? Are you actually negotiating the process as you go along? Are you waiting on a signature? Have they given you a verbal agreement? Yes, we're going to do business with you, but you're still waiting for that signature. Then obviously, you know, you won. The biggest challenge for organizations who have sales process in place today is a lot of them are very ambiguous. And what do I mean by that? They may be something like, it may just be 50%. And if you ask a different sales member on your team, where's that in the process? One will say 30, one will say 70, one will say 50, and it's hard to predict on that. If you have an ambiguous sales process, you can't predict it because everybody has a different view of it is. Really hit me. I took some Six Sigma classes a long time ago, and one of the exercises we had was a definition of a defect. Okay, a definition of a defect, and the exercise is they took M&Ms and they lined them up on a table, and the entire class had to go through and mark which one had a defect on it. And when you looked, some were easy. They had a chip on the M&M. Some were a little bit harder. The M was missing on the M&M. And as you moved forward, there was 3 yellow ones and 2 green ones, and I can't remember the color of M&Ms. There was one of the other color of M&Ms sitting there. And the entire class did not agree on which one actually had a defect and which one didn't. And it's the same with the sales process. If you don't have a clear, defined sales process, you're not going to have any confidence in it because I'm going to view something very different than the next person. And so you want to spend some time and have an unambiguous sales process and define them as best you can. Otherwise, you're not going to really be able to trust what the sales pipeline is going to predict. Include a revenue factor. And so obviously, if you have a conversation, there's a very small chance you're going to close business. If you're waiting on a signature, there's a very good chance you're going to close some business. And so just assigning some very simple weights to those stages of the sales process can help you start understanding what revenue looks like. And then, you know, I've worked on sales processes, anything from, 3 steps all the way up to 15 plus. RFP sales process is very different than a renewal sales process. It's very different than selling through a distributor sales process. It's very different than working with a dealer on a sales process. Mapping them out, they're all a little bit different. And understanding, as you work through these, you'll probably have 5 or 6 different sales processes. You map them out over time. And there's some other categories. Say someone comes to you and say, hey, I want to do this, but the boss just cut my budget. I can't do it now, but I want to do it. So maybe there's a deferred bucket. That's a standard one that we like to use. Booked is a simple one. So after you win it, you got to order product or deliver services or do something. And so there's some administrative stuff that happens between won and booked. And obviously lost. Lost is an important one too. Most organizations can't tell you how many deals they pursue and how many they win and how many lose. It's a very simple statistic. Not many organizations can tell you what that true number is, because a lot of times an actual deal gets created when they're waiting for signature. So, yes, I see smiles on everybody's faces because you know it's true. It happens all the time. So we just started talking about the first part of this, which is actually defining a sales process. Let's talk about the deal, okay? So there are 6 non-negotiable things that I think you have to track on every single deal your sales team's facing or following up on today. And these are it. What do you think the anticipated revenue of this opportunity is? Okay? And we could have probably a multi-hour discussion on how you even come up with that, but we're not going to right now. Experienced salespeople will have a very good idea what that is. Unexperienced salespeople are going to need guidance on that, or your pipeline's going to be off. Who is this deal associated with? A simple description. It doesn't even have to be a bibliography of information. A couple words can give you a lot of information. All right? When is it going to close? It's a very key piece of information. This number is going to change all the time, but as of your best understanding this moment, when do you think it's going to close? And who's the contact that you're working with on this deal? Now, I got 5 here. I said there was 6. Anybody have any idea what the 6th piece of information you need to track? Ah, yes. You got to put them in the right buckets in the process. All right? So if you take that, and I kind of, for illustrative purposes, I shrunk that pipeline down just to four key pieces. And so if you take that and you kind of put a dividing line between each of those stages, and you start taking those deals you're tracking and you just start putting them in the different stages. Okay? It's not very complex, but this right here gives you so much insight into your pipeline. You know, years ago I can remember we needed to do a sales plan, and 3 weeks before the end of the quarter, we locked everybody in the conference room, we handed out pizza, and we put a spreadsheet together, and that was our sales forecast. Today, you can't afford to run a business like that. You have to know. And so let's just talk about some of the key pieces of information this starts giving you just by doing this simple little exercise. First, it's going to tell you how many deals are you chasing in each stage of the pipeline. Okay, that's a good metric. If you have one deal that's worth $1 million, it's not as valuable as 100 deals versus with $10,000, right? Opportunity gives you your total expected revenue if you closed everything. That's not realistic for any stage, but it kind of gives you what's the range of opportunity. And the last thing it gives you, if you put together some sort of factor, it actually gives you a factored projection on how valuable that piece of revenue or that piece of pipeline, how much revenue you have in that specific stage in the pipeline. And if you start mapping this out across all of them, it starts giving you a pretty detailed understanding. This is not Watson level projections, right? But this is way better than probably 90% of the companies I come along, especially smaller business who's been in business for a long time. It's way ahead of what most are doing today. And it starts giving you a tremendous amount of information. If you just start breaking this down, you can start getting forecast by date. So you know what the quarter could look like. You know, everything can change. It's a pipeline. It's a forecast. But realize you can do that. You can see if you added other key pieces, it could be by product. How much projected revenue by product line do you have? You have what is your total factored for a specific period of time. You can start drilling and slicing this few piece of information in so many different ways to give insight to your business. It'll take you time to understand how you can really actually even start leveraging all of it, if that makes sense. So if you haven't put a standardized sales process in place, start doing it today. It's not hard. It takes a little bit of work, but it will make a huge difference to your organization over time. So moving on, the third thing I was talking about is tracking sales activities. And anytime you mention tracking anything with anybody, most people say, heck no. And this is my period right here. It's heck no with a big period, okay? They don't want it. Great salespeople want to improve, and they're going to want feedback. So if you have people pushing back on it, chances are they're probably going to be the lower performing people on your organization anyway, which sparks some other conversation. There's basic level activity tracking that you should have in place right now. Some of the simple ones, just number of meetings. How many meetings as a salesperson? You can't close any business if you don't have a conversation. How many meetings? How many phone calls does it take to get a meeting? How many emails does it take to get a meeting? These are things that are more challenging to track than you may think. But you can. And it doesn't have to be hard. So, just having a tracking meetings with who you're meeting with. When was it? What was the topic about? What emails did this customer receive? How many emails did this customer receive before they actually responded to you? This one's the scary one, calls. No one wants their calls recorded. But then again, how can you improve? If no one listens to your calls, how do you improve it? How do you raise the game? It's kind of hard. And this is the reaction most salespeople have. Are you serious? You're going to get to that level of detail. And like I said, before, our businesses depend on the high level revenue. We can't put that to chance. And so you have to work past this. It takes time, and it can be handled well, but you have to move past tracking stuff with your team. And even digging deeper, we talked about the deal, right? If you can even get deeper and track those communications at the deal level, then you can start seeing what does it take to move a deal from the beginning of the process to the end. And I don't care how simple your sales process is, you'll be surprised how much happens from A to Z. It's a lot. All right, moving ahead. Todd just talked about tracking our activities, and the next one is, what do you look at? And this isn't the Bible on what to measure, but this is going to give you some indications on things that you should be measuring, okay? So there's some high-level stuff. Obviously, you're going to track revenue. We already just spent a whole bunch of time talking about pipeline, and we just spent some time talking about activity. And so there's a lot that you're going to want to track on all ends of this spectrum. And I'm going to give you some things that you should consider. And then you can add to it, you can subtract to it, you can change it depending on your business. So at the high level, what are some things? It should be very easy for you to track. And most organizations track revenue, right? And it's a reactive, we'll get more into this second, it's a reactive metric. I can't tell you, I want you to give me more revenue. And that leads to more revenue. It doesn't. It tells you what happened, doesn't tell you what's going to happen. But you should understand week to date, month to date, quarter to date, year to date, and be able to slice that by a whole bunch of different things. Company, sales reps, and a whole bunch of other things. Let's see here. Moving on. And compare it with the previous period. Your salespeople should be able to see it, your sales team, your region, whatever makes sense for your organization, you should be able to track it. Quota attainment. Can you track your quota attainment at any point in time, in real time, every single day, know where you're at on the bogey you're trying to hit? Again, you should have access to this, your team should. Now, getting a little bit deeper, a lot of organizations start struggling on some of these things. So let's take pipeline, for instance. In this example here, let me see, we got a fancy laser pointer here, and I'm probably going to screw it up. But if you take a look here, so in October, we have factored revenue, or this is unfactored revenue compared with factored. It kind of starts giving you a range of what to expect in a certain month. So on the high end, you think you're going to close X. On the more realistic, it starts giving you the Y, and you start comparing that over time, and you can see, obviously, the factored revenue starts having there's a big range, but at least it starts giving you a range of expectations versus nothing. So you start seeing kind of what is my range of opportunity, right? And if you keep on moving, you can start projecting this out. Typically I see, depending on the business, you can start projecting 4 to 6 months out pretty accurately. Then the accuracy starts going down. But for 4 to 6 months out, you can have a pretty good idea of what's in the pipeline and what's going to come. And then obviously, this right here shows, what should I close for this set period of time? And it's this kind of a weighted forecast. Here's the quota right here of our goal. Here's what we've closed so far in the booked category, and this is the stuff that's anticipated. It gives you kind of a factored, weighted approach that you can look at anytime you want to. And then if you have a wide range in deals, some organizations have huge deals and very small deals. If your business is like that, you're going to want a list of your top 10 deals that your sales team is chasing all the time. You want that in front of you. That's the strategic part, where if you're a sales leader or a president, you need to spend some time and make sure the stuff is happening that needs to be. And then you can start breaking this by a whole bunch of things. What's the average time per stage? So this is just a snapshot. I pulled some of our latest data from our company. And so you can see here in the, I'm color challenged, so I'm going to do my best here. We spend 16 days in our appointment set, 4 days in understanding if a customer has a need, a month, oh boy, color challenged. All right, you get the idea. We have a clear understanding of how long does it take for a deal to progress from stage A to stage B to stage C, and you can start seeing, okay, this a month is the longest stage. What happens if I attack that piece of the sales process and say, if we did ABC, could we reduce that by 10 days or even 5 days? If you have a big sales team, you can start shrinking strategically your sales cycle time, all right? And this is just taking that simple 6 piece of information and laying that on a sales process, right? It's not rocket science, but it does take work. Don't get me wrong. Let's talk about some of the activity level tracking. So, there's a couple things that I like to track. One is growth and reach, all right? What is your total opportunity that your organization has, okay? So are you adding new contacts to reach out to? Are you adding new organizations to reach out to if you're in B2B sales? How many emails are you sending out? Not that this is going to, be 100% predictive, but if you send 0 emails out, you're probably going to get 0 responses, right? And so you can start seeing some of this. What about incoming email? Incoming emails, a great metric to start measuring, because you start seeing, are you getting a response from your activities? If you can start measuring that, gives you a ton of information. Meetings, how many meetings are you having? That's kind of the result of all the activity, right? You're trying to get a conversation with somebody. It takes work to do that. Call outcomes. Does anybody here in the room know how many calls it takes to get somebody, I guess I'm giving the answer away right here, get somebody to actually answer the phone? About 1 in 10. So if you make 10 cold calls, you'll probably get 1 person. It gives you a metric, right? So you start understanding how many calls do you need to make to have a meeting, right? It's more than you think. I can promise you. But it's better to know and attack the problem than not know and wonder why you're not getting meetings. Make sense? All right, so this is just kind of a high-level idea on some things that your organization should be measuring. There's 1,000 more. There's a lot that's specific to your businesses, but this kind of gives you an idea. All right, add a dose of accountability and prepare for fallout. If you implement all this stuff, you've just layered in more accountability than your organization's probably used to. And you're going to start seeing some things, okay? And I was at a presentation probably a year ago, a guy by the name of Charles Matthews at Alcatel-Lucent, who's actually a service guy who was forced into the VP of sales role, and he had to figure out, mentally come to a place, and how could he figure out what were his best sales reps. And if you look at progressing, now I'm going to get back into some stuff that we studied in like 5th grade here. The x-axis and the y-axis. If you're not in engineering, you may have to Google it. I think I did. But if your organization, your sales team, if all these dots represent salespeople, okay, And it's very easy to know if a salesperson's hitting a revenue goal, right? We look at it, they hit their quota, they're knocking it out of the park. It's pretty easy, right? No rocket science to that. And so, teams that are hitting the revenue goal, you'll see on the right-hand side of this quadrant. Teams up here are doing the right things that your organization's uncovered that lead to sales, okay? So on the left-hand quadrant, you can obviously see people aren't hitting the quota, but they're doing the right things. Let's talk about that. He called it the y-axis, and it really stuck out to me because, what are the critical things? Has your organization identified the critical things you need to do to drive revenue? What are those? I think it varies. We're still struggling with trying to figure it out for our organization. It's not an easy thing. We know we want happy customers. You could measure customer satisfaction. We know we want customers that recommend us. Maybe you add Net Promoter Score to that. We want salespeople who are doing the activities that lead to sales. That's probably a component of it. We want our customers, we sell more complex technologies and business consulting services. If our customers don't adopt that, they're not going to be with us for very long. And so, these are some of the things that I think should make up a why, the success criteria for your organization, but I think that's kind of a journey you have to go through to start identifying what are those key things. And so if you start kind of talking to the quadrants, that's easy to talk about the rock stars. They're killing it on revenue, and they're doing the things that your organization has identified are the right things in the right ways with customers. And we've worked with sales, we do a lot of events, and we've worked with some of the event sales people who are awesome at closing our business, but then do a terrible job executing the event. And so you can, if you don't drive the why, even though you're hitting the revenue numbers, you can still impact negatively your business. That make sense? Okay. The bottom right, call these the lone wolves. These are the people who are killing revenue, but they're not necessarily doing it in the right way. They're still positive to the business, but they maybe not be doing it in the way that you would like. The left hand, if you've identified the right things for a salesperson to do, they're going to end up successful. They just may not be today, and it may take some time for them to be successful. You have to give them time. I'm not even going to talk about the bottom left. I think we all know what happens there. They're not driving revenue. They're not doing the right things. The worst thing you can do is sit and not do anything. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. And so I hope out of all of this thing, revenue is a reactive metric. I can tell you, please go get me some more revenue. But if I demand that of you, it's not going to get me more revenue because you find out if you're successful after it's happened. Make sense? Your why is a proactive metric. If you measure it and the people do the right things, it should be indicative that you're going to get revenue. Does that make sense? It's a very important concept because most people say, I need revenue, go get me some revenue. And they tick off their star performers because they just demand revenue, but they're not telling them how they can be even more successful at driving it. All right? I like this sign. Great things never come from comfort zones, and this is going to probably lead, if you go down this path, to some uncomfortable conversations that will probably end up better for your organization after you've had them than before, but realize that you will get out of your comfort zone a little bit on this. Make sense? I can promise you will. Working with an organization right now who it has impacted, and they're better for going through that. So let's just talk about these things. We've picked a focus. We're starting to work on some of our aspects of our pipeline, and you start seeing where gaps are, okay? So if you are having a hard time scheduling meetings with your customers to have a conversation, maybe that's the part where you need to focus, okay? So what could you do? Well, in a lot of organizations, it's please go get me some more meetings. Okay, but it doesn't really map out the process to get the meetings. If you sit down with your team and you say, if we do these things over 2 weeks, we're going to get this many meetings, right? You can start mapping it out. And then if you measure that, you can see if it worked. And if it didn't work, you change it up, change the language. Interesting, I just actually work with a company. They go and they come back. And if they make some relationships there, maybe they turn into business. This organization is taking a much more proactive approach to the trade show. And so we put in a process, this doesn't match it, this is just kind of an idea, a process where we actually allowed the people attending the event to schedule 15-minute appointments with the company before the event. And so we scheduled, by doing this, before the event even started, we scheduled 50 appointments with that company before they even set foot on the trade show floor. All right? And these are not small companies, these are Fortune 100 companies that they're having meetings with, just by calling and emailing them before the event. And most companies don't do that. Let's talk a little bit about innovating. You know, we talked at the beginning on the maturity model on improving. Everybody, this is an example of just a simple email. And there's a couple metrics that are industry-wide that you've probably heard a lot about. The subject, if it's compelling, it'll get someone to open an email. All right, so if you look at your open rate, it will tell you if your subject is good or not in a lot of instances, or relevant to the audience you're sending it out to. The content is what gets people, so the actual body of the content is what gets people to actually do something. All right, so if people are opening but they're not clicking on your stuff, it's probably a gap in the content that's not making them do that. So if you are struggling with getting appointments, this is go back to that. We're trying to get an appointment, a conversation scheduled with a prospect. If we look at the open rate, the click-through rate, and we see we're better with option B than we are with option A, why don't we make option B universal for the company? If one rep finds a real compelling message that drives an action, why don't we use it across the whole team? And there's so many ways. This is just a simple example to innovate, but innovation should never stop. And there's so many ways today to innovate on all aspects of business, but sales for sure. And so I'm going to go back here for a second to the sales maturity model and just let you think for a second, where is your organization today? After hearing about this, do you have a standardized structure, a sales structure in place? If you do, you're ahead of a lot of companies. Do you understand where, at least initially, how many are in each bucket? And how valuable is that? And when is the close date? If you understand that, and you're starting to see where at least initially, where your sales are breaking down, then you kind of reach level 2. If you get down to level 3, and you're looking at, success by stage, where is your sales process breaking down? If you give a demo and no one buys from you, there's a problem there. But do you know that? Are you tracking that? Is that the biggest area? And level 4 is really looking at all the different activities you're doing in context of the sales and saying, where can I impact that? If I improve these pieces, it's going to improve this, and you'll be able to easily map that to sales as you mature the process. And so let's go through the 7 secrets again. So where's your organization in the process? Have you organized your process? Track your sales activities. Get deeper. If you're tracking a high level today, get deeper in that aspect so you can start improving it. Find some deeper measurements. Go a little bit deeper than you have in the past. Add a dose of accountability, and prepare there will be some fallout. I can promise you. Find some areas to automate and obviously innovate. In college a number of years ago, I was taking a chemistry class, and I didn't do very good in chemistry. If you're wondering, I really struggled hard, mightily in chemistry class. And the professor offered the golden ticket. They said, if you go do this thing, we're going to give you extra credit. And our class ears perked up, and we were thinking, okay, what is the professor? I'm going to do anything this professor says because I really need that golden ticket in my chemistry class. He said, I want you to go give some blood. If you go give blood, I'm going to give you extra credit in your chemistry class. And so I was pretty desperate at the time. And I lined up to give some blood. And I was sitting next to this guy, and he looked at me, and he was kind of shaking a little bit, and he said, you know, I hear they use square needles here. At that moment, I just about ran out of the auditorium. I said, get me out of this place. Yeah, I ended up doing it. I got my extra credit, and I did not fail chemistry, thank you very much. But a lot of us approach sales with a square peg to try and fit it in a round hole. It doesn't work. It scared the snot out of me in my chemistry class. Doesn't work in sales either. And so, you know, I hope some of this was helpful for you to at least give you a different way of thinking about it, or maybe you've mastered it. But I hope it gave you a different window to look through your sales and see you can make a difference. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes now just opening it up for questions, if anybody has any. And we do have a roving mic, and please don't be shy. I want some good ones. All right, we have a question right over here, Corey.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually lead up a client success department, and so I'm wondering how some of this can translate to existing customers.
Okay. That is a good question. So if you're looking at client success, and what is your goal? Are you trying to work on business value? So is your customer success team trying to provide business value or trying to provide adoption? What's your goal?
Our goal is really to cultivate the account and kind of find existing opportunities or additional opportunities within an account. So it is really going to asking for referrals, different contacts.
Inside the same organization or outside?
Inside the same organization,
okay.
Yep.
So when you think about this, I mean, that's kind of a sales process, right? Yeah, you can go ahead and keep it. You may have another question or two. So if you look at that, what's the first step? It's maybe identifying an opportunity. So you're having a conversation, you're working with an organization, and you see a problem, right? And if you start quantifying that problem, I don't know necessarily what your organization does, but if you start quantifying that, said, you know, if we did this, then it would make this impact. So your first stage could be, have you identified a need? Have you quantified the need so it has a compelling ROI that they're willing to, you know, take the next step and do it? If they are, do you have buy-in, right? So you could develop stages that go right all the way till you've implemented it, and now are they realizing the return that you promised them at the beginning? Actually, it's the goal for a lot of service-oriented companies like to get there ourselves, is how can we say, if you trust us to take this problem on, we're so confident in the ROI that you just pay us a percentage of the ROI. I'd love to get there. We're not there yet as an organization. There are some that are, though. And if you start tracking that, you could get there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for bearing with me on this presentation here. It did have one thing, you know, if you're looking at the sales process and it looks about like this to me, or basically me to a chemistry class, you know, we do have an evaluation. We can help you at least kind of get over the hurdle. We're happy to do that. And we've actually put in a bonus for our appointment setting guide too, if you do sign up for that. And this is what typically the salespeople look like after we start talking through a standardized process for the first time. But we're happy to help you out with that. And then obviously we're here at CPI to help you any way we possibly can. So thanks for coming out here today.